A popular teenager murdered on the grounds of an elementary school.
She did absolutely nothing wrong.
Then another woman is viciously stabbed.
This guy could be a serial killer.
The attacker, in his haste to get away, leaves a vital piece of evidence.
In the laboratory, we call it Cinderella evidence.
DNA connects the two assaults.
But you need more than DNA. You need a name.
Then another deadly attack linked to the same man. It's up to homicide detective Molly Dahl to track down this brutal killer before he strikes again.
He's wanting to murder women.
Across the bay from San Francisco lies the city of San Leandro, California, a city that has grown increasingly popular among young families for its small-town feel and seaside setting. It's the evening of November 5th. A storm sweeps in, bringing torrential rain. At 8:30 p.m., Patrol Officer Jim Stark is dispatched to Jefferson Elementary School. An alarm that picks up both movement and sound has been triggered by a strange banging coming from the building.
I responded, went and checked it out. Walked the perimeter, checked the doors, make sure it was all secure, which it was. I decided to walk the school grounds itself, just to make sure that we weren't missing something. When I got to the end of the buildings, I could see an umbrella that was upside down. It was open, it was collecting rain. As I rounded around the building, at that point I could see some clothing.
Scattered across the yard, a pair of shoes and a jacket, an ominous trail to what he is about to discover.
So I continued around the building. When I got to the corner of the building, I could hear a little banging sound. It wasn't real hard pounding, it was just very light, but something that was methodical. So I peeked around the corner, and that's when I saw the victim.
A young woman lying beside the school wall.
With her left hand, she was hitting the wall of the building, the exterior wall. She had been shot in the head.
Officer Stark calls for an ambulance and police backup.
As soon as I got off the radio, my raincoat went off, and I put it around, on top of her to cover her. I reached down, grabbed her hand, just to let her know, hey, help is coming.
Paramedics rush the victim to emergency. Back at the crime scene, investigators, including lead detective Autry James, start the search for evidence.
If you'd asked me the day before, had I seen everything, I would have told you absolutely. There's nothing that's going to surprise me or shock me at this point. But I got to tell you, I was shocked. I was shocked at the level of violence involved.
Detective Rick DaCosta is concerned the storm is washing away evidence.
Any sort of shoe print, footprint would more than likely have been either destroyed or would have been very difficult to identify at a later time. One of our folks that collects evidence, they discovered a shell casing that was near where the umbrella was. So our assumption was that was where she was shot. And she had been dragged a short distance.
Using school ID, police identify the victim as 15-year-old Evelina LeBlanc. They immediately locate her mother.
I asked him what had happened, and he says, well, it wasn't anything Evelina did. He said, I think she probably was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I said, well, what do you mean? So he said, well, Evelina's been shot.
Evelina was the apple of her mother's eye.
She's like my best friend. Evelina was a very bubbly, bright, loving, outgoing, intelligent young woman. She was a good student. The type of person, if you met her, you'd never forget her.
By the time Arlene arrives at the hospital, Evelina's on life support.
And they told me that she had put up a struggle because she had had her nails done and 2 of the nails had come off. But they had cleaned her and she looked like she was just asleep. So the doctor came in and he told me that Evelina was not gonna make it.
The next morning, with her mother at her bedside, Evelina is taken off life support. The case is now a homicide. Investigators get to work, searching for her killer.
Initially, we didn't know if this was someone who knew Evelina, who was angry with her. We had no idea what the motive was. We didn't know if it was a jilted boyfriend.
Police found a DNA sample on Evelina they believe is from the killer. They run it through the national database, but there's no match.
Somebody who has this type of disregard for human life more than likely isn't going to just do it once. Our hopes were that at some point, this person's DNA would be uploaded into a database and we would get some sort of hit on this person.
Until then, they must rely on more traditional police work to find their killer.
What we tried to do is to map out what her day was, from the very beginning when she woke up to the point when she was attacked. What we learned is that Evelina had been at one of the local high schools' football games that day.
Evelina decided she was going to leave the game early. She just couldn't deal with the rain and the cold, so she left her friends and headed back using public transportation.
We managed to find out which bus she was on, and from there we were able to contact some individuals who were on the bus, and one of them was a bus driver.
The driver recalls that after Evelina boarded, a young man started calling out to her.
After a short period of time, the young lady got up, walked towards the back of the bus where this young man was, and they initiated a conversation.
According to the driver, the two step off the bus together at approximately 6:30 p.m.
And it looked as though to her that they were preparing to cross the street.
Evelina gets off the bus only 5 blocks from where she's murdered.
That was the last time that anyone recalls seeing her alive.
Could this young man, a teenager himself, be Evelina's killer? Or can he help lead police to the person who is? 15-year-old Evelina LeBlanc was brutally murdered in an elementary schoolyard. As police investigate the gruesome crime, a bus driver provides vital information. She saw Evelina step off the bus with a young man only 2 hours before the murder.
That individual who got off the bus with Evelina was really the focus of our investigation.
Police release a composite drawing based on the bus driver's description of the teenager seen with Evelina.
A light-skinned African-American male, probably 15 to 17 years old, with a thin build and cornrow-style haircut.
Officers blanket San Leandro with flyers in the hope witnesses will come forward. Then they begin the arduous process of trying to identify potential suspects at Evelina's high school.
We talked to so many kids, so many adults that knew Evelina, just trying to establish who could be this angry with her, who could have this sort of venom inside of them.
The goal was that every contact she made, we wanted to speak with that person who she made that contact with, because they either were a suspect or someone who was going to lead us to a suspect.
Since police have DNA from Evelina's attacker, they hope to find him by matching his genetic profile to someone she knew.
There were actually search warrants written for the collection of DNA evidence from some males in the area, some students, and some non-students.
With the use of DNA, we were able to exclude people who were within her circle that necessarily didn't have an alibi.
Unfortunately, we never got a match.
In addition to not finding a DNA link, no one recognizes the composite.
We were never able to identify who the individual was that got off the bus with Evelina.
The frustration level was very high for our agency. because this was such a devastating crime.
The unsolved crime is also devastating for Evelina's mother.
I was very angry. I wanted him captured. I wanted the person captured that, had taken her life.
Despite investigators' best efforts, it seems Evelina's savage killer will escape justice.
As some of these cases go, unfortunately, the weeks turn into months, the months turn into years, and before you know it, it becomes a cold case.
Flash forward 13 years. The cold case murder of Evelina LeBlanc is about to heat up, but in another state. It's a cool March night in Portland, Oregon. 35-year-old Elena Thompson is walking home.
I was coming from playing a video poker. Ran into this guy, and he was coming from around a truck, across the street.
As the man approaches her, he introduces himself, but she can barely understand his name. It sounds like Nani or Naji.
He asked me, was I from the islands? I told him I wasn't from the island. And his temper went sky high, so I lied and said, okay, yeah, I'm from the islands. I was just playing with you, so he came back down to his normal self.
There's something off with this strange man.
I kind of got away from him and ran across the bridge, and I looked back and I didn't see him anymore. But I still thought and felt somebody was following me. He pops up on a blue bike, and I said, you need to stop following me. I lied to him and told him the police is following me. I just got into it at a bar, and he said, no, bitch, I'm following you. He jumps off his bike. We fight. He pulls out something out of his pocket. At that time, I didn't know what it was, but I heard a click. This was a Fisher knife. He stabbed me in my arm, the top of my head, and he kept saying his God told him to. I felt blood, warm blood. It was just like coming down my face. That one to the head was like life-threatening.
As the attacker goes to stab her again, he's interrupted.
And it's like this guy came down with a skateboard, put his skateboard down in the middle of the street, brushes over. This guy who stabs me runs and get his bike and runs off.
Elena's savior races to get her help.
By the time I got to the hospital, through the doors, they said I had 5 more minutes to live. I lost a lot of blood. After I woke up, I seen the pictures they took, and one of the pictures really scared me because my eyes was taped down like I was in a morgue.
When police arrive at the scene of the stabbing, they find a vital piece of evidence. Elena's vicious attacker lost his shoe. The shoe is sent to forensic scientist Janelle Scott at the Oregon State Crime Lab.
Believe it or not, shoes are left behind at the scene of crime quite a bit. In fact, in the laboratory, we call it Cinderella evidence.
But shoes aren't a great source of DNA.
If you think of a shoe, it has very little direct contact with the skin itself. So for example, I would expect a good profile from the back of your shirt that rubs on your neck. Shoes generally are separated from your skin by socks.
It's a long shot, but with no other evidence left at the scene, police hope DNA will identify this violent criminal. And there's good news, sort of.
So we swabbed the shoe, and we obtained a partial profile from it, which means there wasn't a lot of DNA there, but it was enough information to search it against our database.
Elena Thompson was savagely stabbed as she walked home late one March night in Portland. She survives, but the attack leaves her terrified.
I was scared because they haven't caught up with him. I was scared to go places. I don't like people sitting behind me. I don't like crowds. I don't go shopping anymore unless I'm with my brother. He just changed me.
When her attacker fled, a vital piece of evidence was left behind, his shoe. And even though shoes aren't usually a good source of DNA, forensic scientist Janelle Scott manages to extract some.
We got a partial profile because there wasn't a lot of DNA left behind. That partial profile was added to the database.
Even more remarkable, the DNA found on the shoe matches DNA from another crime scene altogether.
We found out that that profile matched to a profile left behind at a homicide from 1994 in California.
She has just linked two vicious crimes: the unsolved murder of high school student Evelina LeBlanc and the attempted murder of Portland resident Elena Thompson.
That the DNA profiles were from the same person was astonishing.
San Leandro detective Rick DaCosta is contacted about the match.
My heart started beating faster. My first thought was, I can't wait to let Arlene know that we may one day solve this case.
I just didn't give up hope. I just kept praying and saying, eventually the person will be caught.
Although DNA has linked these sadistic crimes, that's all it can do.
So your DNA profile is a series of numbers, but they don't tell us anything about you, except if you're male or female.
DNA won't tell investigators who the person is.
It doesn't tell us their name, their height, any physical characteristics, or any sort of ethnic background. So science had done all it can do, and it was now up to Portland police to put a name with these crimes.
It falls to homicide detective Molly Dahl to find the killer connected to these unidentified DNA samples.
I had been in homicide less than 6 months, and yeah, I felt the pressure. You don't just go through life and do one violent crime. This is definitely somebody that was prone to do it again.
She believes he's committed more crimes since these attacks.
It fits the profile of someone that's doing this. There's no reason for him not to stop doing it because he's been getting away with it for so many years.
She examines the DNA reports, but it's what she does next that really hooks her.
When I started pulling up pictures of Evelina LeBlanc, that gave me a face that just made me think of one word: innocence. And after I saw Evelina's face, it wasn't just some innocuous crime lab report.
Now Dahl wants to meet with Elena Thompson, the one person to have seen the killer face to face.
I need to get out of her the small details that didn't perhaps make it into a police report from the original interview.
They begin with the attacker's appearance.
She said he was a male black, early 20s, medium build, around 5'8".
Dark, slanted eyes, very short hair.
A description Dahl believes matches the composite sketch of the last person seen with Evelina LeBlanc. Dahl continues to question her witness.
And Eilena has a wonderful memory of that night, even though she should clearly be traumatized and may have blocked out some.
Elena is able to provide a new lead about her attacker. She recalls him introducing himself.
She wanted to think that this guy called himself Naji or Nani, something similar, something foreign sounding.
At the hospital, I couldn't remember nothing but nah. I said, nah, something. I told the officers, nah, something.
Elena asks her friends for help. She describes her attacker to them in hopes they can identify him.
They said, that's not G. And he hangs downtown.
I wanted to run back to my desk, and I wanted to start researching this name, Naji. I had a name. There can't be a lot of Najis running around Portland, so I'm thinking, I'm golden right now. I can do this.
Portland investigators are hunting for a vicious criminal who murdered Evelina LeBlanc and tried to kill Elena Thompson.
I'm blessed to see another day. But I'm still afraid.
Eilina knew that night that this guy was going to kill her.
DNA from the two attacks is matched to the same man.
The two profiles were linked together, but we still didn't have a name to go with them.
Alina, with help from friends, provides two possible names for her attacker.
She told me his name was Naji or Nani.
Alina's friend was being released from prison when she met a man with that name.
And one of her girlfriends said, I know the Naji you're talking about. He looks the same as you describe him. I was being transported to be released on the jail bus with Naji.
Detective Dahl requests the log from the prison transport bus.
I came up with a short list of about 3 possibles, 3 black males that had some similar physical characteristics. And when I looked at their names, there was no Naji. There was nothing similar, not even an N name.
But Dahl is determined to identify the killer. She digs into these 3 men's police records.
The second guy, ordinary sounding name, but when you looked at his aliases and his monikers, there he was. I found Naji. And I am thinking, this is our guy.
Actually, it felt good because they had an idea of who they was going to go get, who they was looking for. One part of me felt relieved, and one part of me was still scared because they hadn't actually got him.
Dahl just needs the crime lab to confirm Naji's DNA matches the genetic profile found at the crime scenes.
To have somebody to compare the crimes to, a name, to see if this was the person, was exciting.
Dahl also puts together a photo lineup with Naji's picture for her eyewitness.
And I rushed back to Eilina.
They sat me at a table, and she had some papers, and she was like, do you know any of these people?
She took a quick scan of all 6 of those photos, and Eilina said, he's not in here. And then my heart kind of dropped a little bit and said, hey, junior homicide detective, slow down.
Even though Alina failed to identify Naji as her attacker, Dahl isn't giving up on this suspect.
Witnesses can always be fallible. It's unreliable unless you have a bunch of witnesses saying the same thing.
Besides, she knows it's DNA science that will prove whether Naji attacked these women.
Janelle Scott called me and said, no, this Naji, his DNA did not match any of our cases.
This is the worst news Dahl could receive. She's no closer to stopping her killer, and lives are in danger.
So I was back to square one, and I felt the time crunch. It was bothering me that he was still walking around, doing his evil things, and that really, why wouldn't he attack another woman?
A state away in California, time also haunts Arlene LeBlanc. Even though 13 years have gone by, she hopes one day her daughter's killer will be found.
I would talk to her picture, and then, whenever I felt like she might have been there, I would let her know. We're still working on it, and he will be caught. I'm not going to give up.
I kept a picture of Evelina on my desk, under my blotter on my desk. I mean, it was a constant presence for me.
It hit home with all of us. And we all couldn't imagine the pain, again, that Arlene must have gone through, still goes through to this day.
In Portland, Detective Dahl is also struggling.
I was disappointed. I did find Naji, but Naji did not kill Evelina or attack Eilina.
With no real leads or suspects, she hopes she can track her killer through police records.
So I decided to start with compiling a list of recent arrests within that geographic area in Northeast Portland. So I had a crime analyst help me start capturing a list of subjects of the same physical description that had been arrested in that area.
The amount of information is daunting, but Dahl is determined.
I knew it was a long long list, and it was gonna take some time to make these lists a lot smaller. The probability that he was gonna be on one of these lists is good. He's in the small part of the city of Portland. He's walking around, he's still out there.
A young woman is killed, another brutally attacked. Both crimes are linked by DNA to the same man, but with no name attached to this evidence. Police are scrambling to identify him before he attacks again.
I could feel him at the tips of my fingers. He was that tangible to me, and it bugged me. So DNA is lovely, yes, but you need more than DNA. You need a name.
As Detective Molly Dawes searches for this elusive killer, a seemingly unrelated assault will take a bizarre turn right into Dawes' investigation. It's a miserable night in Portland when a driver spots a woman lying at the side of the road.
I'm a tow truck driver. I just pulled up onto the scene. I can tell you right now it's serious. There's a lot of blood.
Detective Lynn Courtney is assigned to the case.
When the officers found Charvetti, she was still alive, labored breathing, obvious trauma throughout her body, especially in the head area.
Soon after being rushed to the hospital, Charvetta Brown, a mother of two, dies from her extensive head injuries. At the autopsy, the medical examiner informs prosecutor Susan Howard that there are indentations in Brown's skull.
She took one look at Charvetta Brown's body and looked up at me. She said, you know, I've seen this before. It's likely a hammer.
This woman, Charvettia, had died pretty violently.
It makes you feel pretty sick to your stomach knowing that, you know, this is how someone died, you know, by being bludgeoned to death with a hammer to the head.
Like Evelina's murder 13 years earlier, the night storm creates problems for the investigation.
Evidence such as blood evidence, that would have been washed away. Or again, any kind of impressions at the scene, footprints, tire impressions, that would have an impact on the rain, on evidence.
In an effort to find a much-needed lead, Courtney searches all the night's 911 reports. He spots a call just minutes before Brown was discovered.
We learned that a witness 8 blocks away had called police earlier that same morning. Charvettia was found.
911. We have a very severe bleeding going on my street right now. How many people are fighting? 2. That man is beating the crap out of a woman. She is screaming her lungs out.
She gave us a description of a white pickup truck with a matching white canopy.
And it was a white vehicle. I want to say like a Chevy S10 with a canopy on it.
Police respond to the 911 call.
By the time they got there, nobody was around. They checked the area. They couldn't find a victim. They didn't find this white pickup truck, so they cleared the scene.
Later, with the advantage of daylight, Detective Courtney identifies items strewn on the ground.
We found some things that looked like they might belong in a purse, and so we believe that he moved her once he started the beating, that he put her back in the truck and then dumped her there.
If so, Courtney's best lead is the description of the pickup, and experience tells the veteran investigator it's probably stolen.
I was just looking for white trucks. On the hot sheet, it didn't specify if these trucks had a canopy or not, so I was just going through looking for white pickup trucks that had been recovered recently or stolen recently to see if there was anything unusual about the truck.
He finds a stolen pickup and an owner whose vehicle is returned with more than she wants.
When she got it back, she noticed there was some blood inside the truck. There was some bloody tissues in the truck. It appeared to her that somebody had tried to wipe blood out from inside the truck.
We found Charvetta's blood in this white truck that had been stolen.
In addition, the owner of that pickup truck told us one of the things she was missing was a claw hammer that was in the cab of her truck.
The killer drove this truck the night of the attack, but police are no closer to finding him until a friend of Charvetta Brown's comes forward, who was with her before the horrific assault.
She actually contacted the detectives and told them, I was with Charvetta and an unknown black male We were driving around together in a white truck. I had a bad feeling about what was going on. I didn't like the guy. I got out of the truck and just went home.
She gave us a name of Emoni or Imoni, Amoni, something like that.
Courtney runs the names for matches.
The database I was using works on the phonetic sound of a name, so if you type in Emoni, for instance, you'll get several variations of that name that could possibly be Emoni or something similar.
He gets back 2 unusual names.
An Emoni came up and a Imani came up.
Is it possible Courtney has found Charvetta Brown's killer?
We pursued both names and did some further checks to either eliminate or identify one or the other as a suspect.
As he works the names, Detective Dahl sits nearby, examining police records in a last-ditch effort to find her killer.
I still had a great physical description, and I had his DNA, and I was just starting to go through that list tooth and comb.
The police bureau's cozy working conditions help detectives make an astounding connection.
We are in an office with low partition, so there's not many secrets in our office.
You can't help but overhear what one another are doing or talking about.
And I heard Detective Courtney had found a possible name of his suspect. And I started to listen harder. It went from E-Money to Imani. And we all talk about that light bulb moment. And what I remembered was Eilina saying Naji or Nani. And then I just heard the name Imani. Nani.
Detective Molly Dahl is in a race to stop a violent criminal who attacked Alina Thompson in Portland and killed Evelina LeBlanc near San Francisco.
I felt the pressure. This guy is murdering women. He's wanting to murder women.
Sitting a few feet away, her colleague Lynn Courtney works on what seems to be an unrelated case. The murder of Charvetta Brown, a mother of 2 from Portland, Oregon.
I'm letting my partner know what names I found in this database as possible suspects, and Detective Molly Dahl heard me mention the name Emoni and Imani. And she stood up and said, "Wait a minute, this sounds like the suspect in my case."
I wasn't interested in E-Money. I was interested in Imani. And I flew on the keyboard with his name, and when I pulled up his criminal background, I saw a series of arrests in the 1990s in the Oakland Bay Area, and I smiled. And I smiled to myself, and then I smiled for Evelina and her mother and Eilina.
This man, Imani, was living in the same area where teenager Evelina LeBlanc lived at the time of her murder. Is he responsible for her death and the 2 attacks on women in Portland?
She then takes the name and checks to see what his criminal history is here in Oregon, and she can see that he's been convicted of a felony. And any person convicted of a felony, you have to get your cheek swabbed for the DNA we entered into our database.
Since Imani has done time for robbery, a felony, his DNA should be in the system. Detective Molly Dahl turns to the crime lab.
Imani Williams' sample had been collected, but it hadn't been analyzed. It was waiting in a freezer for us to get to it.
Of course, I asked her to put a rush on it. The sooner I can get this information, the better it's going to make a lot of people feel.
Dahl's work moves Imani's DNA profile into the fast lane.
To put it in perspective, Imani Williams' sample was one of over 30,000 waiting for analysis. It could have been anywhere between a year to 2 years before his sample would have been added if it hadn't been for Detective Dahl giving us his name.
While the DNA is processed, Dahl puts together a photo lineup for Alina Thompson, the one woman to survive an attack by this cold-blooded assassin.
Eilina very systematically looked at each one of the pictures.
She said, "Do you recognize any of these?" And I was like, "That's him."
I wanted to jump up and say, I found my guy, but I didn't want to get my hopes up anymore. I didn't want people to say, you know, oh, Molly's crying wolf again. I wanted to be sure this time.
2 days after overhearing the uncommon name, Dahl receives the forensic news of a lifetime.
So I called Molly, and she was waiting, of course, anticipating the phone call.
And she said, it's him. It's a match. Imani Williams' DNA matches Evelina LeBlanc and Eileen Thompson.
The DNA link confirms it. Detective Dahl has identified the callous criminal who committed these crimes.
That is the ultimate part of my job.
He's arrested on a downtown street and charged with the 2 crimes he committed in Portland: the first-degree assault of Alina Thompson and the murder of Charvetta Brown.
This guy has been hurting women for many years, so I felt good. And I wanted to tell the people that mattered most. And so I got on the phone immediately to Sergeant Rick DaCosta down in California in San Leandro, and this was the phone call I've been waiting to make.
That was the greatest phone call I've received related to law enforcement in the 20 years I've been doing this.
Just the day before, the image of Evelina, the picture that I had on my desk, flashed into my mind. I mean, just out of nowhere. It was weird. And then the next day, we found him. That felt good.
"13 agonizing years after Evelina LeBlanc was murdered in California, San Leandro detectives are about to confront Imani Williams, who is now in custody for his 2 Portland crimes.
I think that Mr. Williams was caught completely by surprise when my partner and I went up to Portland.
Does the name Evelina LeBlanc ring a bell with you at all? No? Never heard that name before? You're positive?
Yes, that was the honest answer.
You're about to say something else. No. That was what? You said that was a long time ago.
That's my honest answer.
Did you already know her from before? Was she an acquaintance or a friend of a friend, or you just met her that night? You gonna stare at the table all night? Or are you gonna tell us about it?
Imani's not talking, but his crimes speak for themselves.
Given his violent nature, I think he's the type of criminal that wouldn't have stopped.
You stick this oral swab just in your mouth, on the inside of your cheek. You make that kind of, okay? You do that 10 times.
A final DNA sample is conclusive proof. Imani Williams is the man responsible for these horrific crimes.
I was excited because the same DNA was left behind at each of these scenes, and that same DNA profile came from Imani Williams' mouth.
Everybody was happy, and it was a sense of relief.
You asking me what do I think about the DNA business?
Yeah.
DNA is DNA, bro. I really can't say.
It's hard to dispute that, huh?
It is.
So, it's not a question of did you or not. I already know the answer. Some things, what we need to talk about here in the next few minutes are going to be some of the most important minutes of the rest of your life, okay? It's not a question of did you. The question is why and the circumstances.
The keenly focused work of Portland detective Molly Dahl put a madman behind bars.
It felt wonderful. I mean, that's the pinnacle of an investigation. Yeah, I caught a killer.
With the help of Janelle Scott's DNA work, Dahl connected deadly attacks on 3 women in 2 different states.
In the end, the DNA was a link that crossed state lines, but without Molly Dahl, it wouldn't have a name to go with it. She is the one who did the investigative work that linked these crimes truly to one individual.
His name is Imani Williams.
God is not gonna like me, man. I've been in so many sinful things, bro.
Charvetta was beat in the head with what we believe to be a hammer, and Elena Thompson was stabbed in the head. You have the victim down in California being shot in the head. In all three instances, he went for the woman's head.
Is that what you're telling us? That, man, this didn't bother you a bit? And it never kept you awake at night?
Looking into his eyes, it was very cold, almost inhuman. He would answer our questions, but it's almost like he didn't have a care in the world.
Only Elena Thompson survives this savage killer.
I'm blessed. I'm blessed. I'm real blessed. But I could have been one of those who he have killed.
Due to Dahl's tenacity, he's off the street.
My only regret was that I didn't find his name until after he'd killed Charvetta.
Dahl conclusively proved Imani killed Charvetta Brown and tried to kill Elena Thompson. He pleads to murder and first-degree assault and is sent to prison.
So he ends up doing a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 30 years. You know, if I'm still alive, I'll be at that parole board hearing, and we will, make sure that he stays in.
Are you that much of an animal?
Once an animal, always an animal.
Even more disturbing is the fact that Williams was very young when police believe he started killing.
And I feel like there was something in his wiring that was wrong, because we surmise, based on the evidence, that he killed Evelina LeBlanc when he was 14 years old.
Because Imani was a juvenile back in 1994 when Evelina was murdered, it's the one case for which he can't be tried.
You can't prosecute him. He's outside the jurisdiction of the court.
If he had been tried and convicted of this unspeakable act, he would have been sent to the California Youth Authority until the age of 25. Well, by the time we talked to Mr. Williams, he was already 29 years old.
After all these years, Evelina LeBlanc's mother will not get the justice she deserves.
That Arlene was not going to be able to go into a courtroom and look him in the eye and speak whatever words she wanted to him, to confront him. I was severely disappointed.
That's the one thing I wanted to ask. Why did you do it?
We know who did it. We can actually close the books on that case. It was a big deal to me that this person was found. I feel better. Not just for me, but for Arlene. I mean, just imagine what she's gone through all these years.
Arlene does find some solace in the prison term Imani is handed for his other monstrous crimes.
It was really like a weight that was, lifted. At least I know that he would not be able to hurt anyone else. At least he was, behind bars.
I can't give this family back their loved one. I can't erase the pain and the grief, but I can give them that little bit of closure. And that is the best part of my job.